Okay, I'm just waiting for notification of that to appear on the screen. Okay, so the meeting is now recording. So I begin by taking the sederant for the Financial Resources Scrutiny Forum on Thursday, the 10th of February 2022. I can see that we have present Councillor Brogan. Do we have Councillor Buchanan? No. I have apologies from Councillor Kalikis and Councillor Donnelly. We can see that we have Councillor Ferguson, Councillor Holford. Do we have Councillor Lennon? No, we have Councillor McAdams, and I have apologies from Councillor Wark. Councillor Cowie, are you substituting for Councillor Lennon today?
Yes, I am, Carol.
That's lovely, thank you. And officers present today are Jackie Taylor, Lorena Hagan, Derek Craig, Gillian Cochrane and myself, Carol Lyne. I'll now pass back to yourself, Chair.
That's great, Carol. Thanks very much as always. Right, okay, so we'll just move straight on to the items of business. So the first item is a declaration of interests. Can I ask for any? There is none. Can you just note that there's none? Okay, so moving on to item 2, this is the minutes of the previous meeting. So for the purposes of the papers, that's like pages 3 to pages 6. So this is for the minutes to be agreed from the meeting on the 9th of December. Can I have a seconder if there's no issues, please?
Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'll move on then to item 3A. So this is the capital budget monitoring. So this is the general fund capital programme. It's on your papers, it's pages 7 to 28. Jackie will take us through it and then pass it on to Derek. I'll just hand it over to you, Jackie, and thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So as Chair explained, this is our budget monitoring report for capital. This takes us to the 31st of December 2021. Section 4 of the report on page 7 summarises the position for the budget this year. And our budget is now totalling 72.433 million. And that reflects a decrease since last time of £5.9 million. These figures are as reported to the Executive Committee last week, and there were a number of adjustments that make up that £5.8 million. We'll cover those in a second in the appendix. There's reference at 4.3 to additional capital grant we got in relation to the Scottish Government funding, and that relates to £96,000. So that has now been brought into the programme as well. Section 4.4 of the report covers the spend to date, so that's the spend to the 31st of December. And to the 31st of December, we've spent just over £37.2 million. In terms of the appendices, on page 10, this is where the adjustments that the Executive Committee approved last week start. And there's a number there for your information. So just to take you through the main ones, under Community and Enterprise Resources, there's additional funding in relation to charging and also in relation to road structures from the Scottish Government. Again, there's extra money in relation to switched on fleet, and they're covered in the first 3 items on page 10. In terms of projects that we'll now spend into next financial year, they start at the bottom of page 10 and include the bridge at Calder Glen. Over the page on page 11, we have White Bridge at Chartlery Country Park, which is the same. And Abingdon Campus for Enterprise is an additional award of funding added into the programme there as well. However, that will spend into next financial year. A couple of smaller items around SPT funding and Campus Lang Park and Ride funding that's also detailed there on page 11, 20,000 and 60,000 respectively. Money in relation to the leisure centres, £480,000 will be moved to the 22-23 capital programme, just reflecting the timing of expected spend in relation to Lark Hall Leisure Centre and in relation to Hamilton Palace Grounds play areas. And that reflects the expected timescales for those as well. In relation to play parks as well, the additional funding that we had in relation to the Scottish Government funding will also move into 2022-23 to pay for posts that were approved as part of a paper that went to the Community and Enterprise Resources Committee. And cycling, walking and safer streets at the bottom of page 11, again reflecting the expected timescales for spend, 512,000 moving into next year. Over on page 12, there is some money in relation to Cathkin Bypass and the City Deal project. That reflects compensation claims and the timing when those are expected to be paid out. There's obviously a process in relation to claims and payouts, and it's now expected that that money will spend next year. We'll move on to education. Early years, the expansion programme there has some movements. We've had a requirement for more spend reflecting price increases of £540,000, and that'll be met from the education revenue budget. However, that will spend into the next financial year, so we'll move that money to allow that spend to happen then. And again, some slippage in ICT and education, £660,000. Again, just reflecting the expected timing of when those payments will go out the door. Prioritised urgent investment under housing and technical resources, £680,000, again, is expected to be spent into 22-23 now, to reflect a number of projects under that heading. And also on the fabric and service investment line as well, that will spend into 22-23. And finally, just reflecting the expected completion date of June 22 for Blantyre Care Facility. Again, we're just tying up the budget available into the correct financial year. So those adjustments totalling £5.877 million were approved at Executive Committee last week. Moving on to page 13 and the appendices that start from there. Appendix B just shows a summary of the overall capital programme over resources. And then on to page 14, you have slightly more information around the services that those spends will take place through. The right-hand column shows the actual spend to the 31st of December. Page 15 and Appendix D covers the funding of the capital programme. Again, members will be well used to seeing the detail here. As I report every period, that the majority of our funding is from borrowing and from Scottish Government capital grant. On page 16, we move on to the physical build update, and Derek will take us through that.
Thanks, Jackie. On the build executive summary then on page 16, we have one project showing there as behind programme, and has already been mentioned in the executive committee paper, that was related to Blantyre Care Facility, which is running slightly behind programme and is moved. The completion date's moved from May to June this year. So that's reflected of the movement in spend as well. And over the page on page 18, there are 7 projects partway down that page noted as behind programme. And if we jump over to page 20, there's a list of those projects, and a lot of them have already been covered in the executive committee paper that Jackie went through. However, I'll just run down them. Hamilton Palace Grounds play area, the tender exercise there has been delayed, waiting for Scottish Government funding announcement, and as at the moment the tenders have been returned and are now being evaluated, so that's slightly later than envisaged. So it won't commence until March 22. The Horseshoe Bridge at Calder Glen, as was mentioned, is behind programme. The detailed design of this project has taken longer than originally anticipated. So the physical works are now planned to commence early in 22-23. White Bridge replacement at Châtellerault Park. An options appraisal is required before the new bridge can be designed and programme of works prepared. The renewal of play parks is behind programme as we've experienced delays in employing 2 temporary landscape development officers who will undertake the surveys. So that's moved into the next financial year. And the next couple are to do with information technology. So there's been delays experienced in the hardware refresh programme due to long lead-in times for equipment, and the information technology infrastructure refresh has been delayed because of equipment and the worldwide shortage of microprocessors. And the last on that page is the Digital Tools Power Apps project has been delayed due to resource availability. Moving on to page 21 is the roads executive summary, and there is noted that the 3 projects are behind programme at this point in time. And over the page on page 22, they're listed there for your information. So it's the cycle scheme, East Kilbride Cycle Network at West Mains Road. The project's been delayed due to resourcing issues. Cathkin, the loss of value and noise insulation regulations surveys. So that's the claims compensation that Jackie talked about earlier. That's taken a bit longer than was envisaged to settle those claims. And the last project is the City Deal Greenhills, Straven Road, and that project's been delayed due to COVID-19 and issues experienced with the supply of materials. That's all, Chair.
That's great. Thanks very much. That was really comprehensive. Thank you. Right, I'll just open up for questions. Right, Eric, you've got your hands up first.
And I've forgotten to unmute. Right, unfortunately, I have quite a few questions. The first one is particularly around the delay on Blantyre, but then the delays in some of the other capital projects. Are there any financial consequences to those? Are we going to see any substantial price rises as a result of those delays? Or is it simply a case of carrying forward money to next year and I don't need to worry?
Do you want to answer Derek, do you want to answer the Blantyre one first?
Yeah, I can do, Chair. The project won't cost any more money because of these delays. It's just physically doing the works, Councillor, and it's when that was envisaged to be done. The movement of that funds is moved into the next financial year, so it's the timing of the spend really.
Okay.
Do you want a subsequent?
Oh yes, please. I've got more I'd like to ask. I want to go back to page 10, and unfortunately, I suppose this was sort of inevitable and you're probably all expecting it, but I'm interested in getting some clarity around the bridge build and the funds that came in. Back in November, I think it was November 2018, the council agreed to put aside £6 million to build two bridges, Penfeek Bridge and the Clyde Bridge between Petnane and Carstairs. And originally, I don't think anybody had an idea of really what the bridges were going to cost. So it was close to a back of an envelope calculation that there'd be 2.5 and 3.5 million, but nominally there'd be 6 million set aside for them. I was always a bit dubious about that, but I'm not an expert, so I couldn't really say too much. Now, in the summer of last year, the Scottish Government launched the local bridge maintenance fund, and we applied for funding for 4 bridges under that, and we got funding for 3 for Penfeek Bridge, Dar Bridge and Scrogton Bridge. We were rejected for the 4th bridge, but we got paid a sum of money coming to around about £2.something million, of which 1.591 was for Penfeek Bridge. Now, Penfeek Bridge did actually come in at around about 2.5 million, so that was pretty good. But the net cost to us of that, because that 1.5 million from the Scottish Government had to be spent on that bridge. That was one of the rules, I believe. So the net cost to us was about £900,000. Now, to me, that means that there still should be £5.1 million available that the council had committed to these bridges. And I'd just like clarity as to whether that 5.1 million is still available. I do appreciate that isn't enough to build the bridge on the current estimates, but I'm wanting to get clarity that that money is still available and that the 1.5 has not been deducted from that, but was because it was additional and unexpected funding. So I just like, I've got another one, but the thing I want to know is now, is the clarity around that and that money is still available, please.
Jackie, do you want to deal with that one?
I can take that, Chair. So, Councillor Holford, you're absolutely right. £6 million of spend was identified and approved as part of the capital programme for 2 bridges. And that was based on, again, I'm not an expert either, but those that had identified the cost of those projects are experts. So the estimate was £6 million at that point in time. You're right that the Penfeek Bridge came in at £2.5 million. So that would leave £3.5 million for Clyde Bridge. It's also correct that we got money in for Penfeek Bridge as well. And that then contributed towards the total costs of that bridge. What that doesn't automatically mean, though, is that the leftover money automatically goes to Clyde Bridge. That's not an automatic process. The approval was for £6 million of spend on bridges, and we've spent 2.5 to date, and that leaves 3.5 there. So that's the facts around the approval and the money that's available. In terms of the money that's been released from the additional Scottish Government grant coming in for Ponfiech Bridge, that is currently within the 2022-23 capital programme proposals that will come to Council in due course, but it's not identified for a specific project. So any decisions around what that's spent on would be for agreement. So it's not an automatic conclusion that money is available for Clyde Bridge. It would have to be a decision that was taken.
Okay, so the fact that we originally committed to spend £6 million on these bridges, and we ended up not having done that. That money was paid from an external fund. So we'd originally agreed to borrow £6 million. We're no longer committing to borrowing that £6 million. Is that correct?
There isn't a distinct link between the council's borrowing and that particular project. That was part of a capital project, a capital programme. Yeah. And that programme, as you know, is funded from borrowing from capital grant. That's how we make up our capital programme. So it's not about borrowing necessarily, it's about being part of our capital programme. But that money hasn't disappeared. It's still within those proposals for next year. It just hasn't been allocated to a specific project yet.
But though that money was provided for a specific project, and the rules of the fund said we had to spend it on that project, that money shouldn't be spent on anything else. It should be spent on that bridge, and that we should still have the availability of funds to build Clyde Bridge. Now, I appreciate that you're saying that's not the case, but I would also like to know what's the procedure from here as to where the funds will come from to build these bridges, and specifically to that. Paul Manning at the executive last week did suggest that he could bring forward a paper to the final executive of this council. Can I assume that's not going to happen now?
Chair, I'm sorry, Eric, I don't understand why we're saying that's not happening. I'll tell you.
Well, is it? I mean, if it's happening, that's great. But the reason I say I didn't think it was happening was because when Councillor Allison proposed an amendment that included bringing forward that paper, that was rejected. So I assumed, therefore, that a paper wouldn't be brought forward to the next executive. If I'm wrong in that, that's very good.
I don't sit in the executive committee, Councillor Holford, so I'm not aware of the proposals around that.
Can I?
Rosie went there. I think that's probably enough for me for the moment. I think I am very disappointed with this, and I'm particularly disappointed that I was given assurances back as recently as September that don't worry, this bridge funding would be there would be sufficient funding. When at that time, £3.5 million to build a bridge 3 times as long as a bridge that cost £2.5 million never seemed to be logical. I say I'm not an expert in bridge building, but building a bridge 3 times as long as one, I didn't expect it to cost 3 times as much, but I certainly expected it to cost more than a third more. That just didn't make any sense to me. But I think that's probably all I need to say for just now on this particular subject. But have no fear, I will be back.
Before I let Grant in, can I ask a question? Because I'm now slightly confused.
Sure.
So, which obviously isn't great. It's about bridges, which I didn't think I'd be having a discussion about bridges, but Eric's brought a few things up there. So, see the money that came in that South Lanarkshire was awarded. So they were awarded money from the Scottish Government, and they were awarded it for bridges. So Scottish Government didn't just say, here, have a bundle of money for bridges. We must have basically did a business case for each of the bridges, and then they've then said, well, for that bridge we'll give you that amount of money, for that bridge we'll give you that amount of money, for that bridge we'll give you that amount of money. So that's like ring fence, ring fence, ring fence, and it's a big ring fence. So we've basically done 2 of the bridges out of 3. but basically the third bridge we haven't done, right? So if the third bridge we haven't done, Eric, what you're trying to get to is, see the money for the third bridge, is it still there, and is it still going to get spent on the next bridge, or am I wrong? Is that what you were looking to find out the answer to?
Well, that's exactly what I'm looking at, because at the moment it looks to me as though the only money we have still allocated towards my bridge, which is the vital link in my community and matters an awful lot. It links the railway station to most of the conurbations, for one thing. But as far as I can see, we only have 3.5 million still allocated towards that bridge. And the latest estimates for that bridge are looking around the £7 million mark. In other words, we have only half the funding. And with only half the funding, it's being deemed to be not viable and, not bang for the buck for the council's pound, which is a mixed metaphor if ever there was one. And that is what's concerning me, because these people have been without this link now for 3.5 years, and it doesn't look like they're going to get it fixed anytime soon, particularly when the build time, even once it's agreed, is going to be 12 months.
Right, okay, so 2 bridges have been built, that's done. Put that in the drawer.
Only one's been built, 2 have been funded, and the 4th one is not, it's just on the back burner for now.
Right, so the one, okay, so see the one that's in the back burner, Jackie, have we been given the money for that, and is it sitting somewhere ring-fenced for that bridge?
There is £3.5 million of council funding for that bridge. The Scottish Government didn't give us any funding for that bridge.
So they didn't give us for that bridge, right, okay. Can we stick that one to the side, Eric?
Yeah. I mean, I've got the clarity I was looking for. It's not the answer I was looking for, but it's the clarity that I was looking for.
Right, so you've got the clarity for that one, so that's great then. So see, to do with the other 3 bridges, see the money that we were given that was allocated for them. Basically, how many of those bridges have been built?
1.
No,
1, right. So let's put that one in the box. So we've got 2 other bridges that we've got the money from the Scottish Government from. What is happening with those 2 other bridges? Are we still building those bridges? Are we still fixing them? What have we done with the money?
That's not been spent yet. That's been moved into next year. That'll get moved into next year to work on those bridges. It's relatively small amounts for those ones.
Right. And do we see any problem with either of those 2 bridges?
I'm not aware of any details around those bridges, to be honest. It was a contribution towards works around those bridges. There is nothing that's been highlighted to me that's concerning around those bridges.
Right. Derek, I'm going to ask you to come in. See, with regards to those 2 bridges, do you see any problem with these 2 bridges? Just to me, that it means then I can just shut off this item and I can move on to Grant, and then that means that Eric has had full answers to his questions.
I'm not sure this is Derek's area, to be fair. But
I wish I could, Chair. Sorry, I don't
I
actually
did see you doing
know
this.
about roads.
Well, I didn't know if you were smiling because you were really happy that I'd asked you a question, or it was a grimace. I was kind of like in between. Right, okay.
I think I can give you comfort, Chair, that see on those other 2 bridges, there's nothing that's been mentioned at all that's of any concern to myself. And I think, Eric, you'd agree with that. If from
only one's in my ward, but there isn't a problem yet. I mean, there's a general problem around building costs and materials. Who knows? But I don't have any specific problems yet. Right.
Perfect. I'm going to move on from you, Grant. I'm now paying my attention to you before I go on to Walter. So apologies for having made you wait for this length of time. It was just that was needing to get clarified. So the floor is yours.
No, that's okay. Not at all. I wanted to talk about, we were talking about renewal of the play parks. And the 2 staff that we were looking to bring on board.
Okay.
And I was just thinking about the length of the contract for those posts, those roles. There's no clarity on that. Could you flesh that out a little bit, please? It's just the reason I'm asking is because it's 233 play areas. It's a lot of ground to cover. And I think, if you've got 2 officers in post, I'm thinking about when those roles, when those staff can begin and sort of, and I'm thinking about the sheer amount of ground they have to cover as well, how long they would be in post for. Thank you.
No, listen, great question. It was actually one that was flagged up to me literally 5 minutes before I came into this meeting. So I'm glad you've brought it up, because from what I said to the person was I was pretty sure it was a 23-month contract, but I would check. But one of the things I did notice when we were going through the paper, which wasn't an issue before, but now you've brought it up, kind of as an issue, which is that they haven't actually managed to recruit, because it was 2 land services people that they were looking to recruit for them to actually do the surveys on the 233 play parks. So probably the question I would ask them, to whoever's most appropriate, Jackie stroke Derek, would be if you could tell us why those people haven't been recruited, or what stage the recruitment is at, and is it definitely 223 month posts, and also what the knock-on effect is going to be, because it's not, the funding isn't going to start in this period. The funding then won't start until the next period, so it's the same amount of money then available, even though it's going into the 22-23 instead of being in the 21-22 that it would start.
Okay. Firstly, this was all approved at a Community and Enterprise Resources Committee, so I don't have that committee paper open in front of me, I'm afraid, but I recall, Monique, that it was a just shy of 2-year contract.
I think it was 23 months, Grant, but we can check that.
See if we can get some clarity over this. Now, this is funding that we got from the Scottish Government as a kind of first instalment of money for play parks. And the committee agreed that the best way of spending this money initially was to get 2 posts in place to undertake the survey work, as you've said. So the money that we've got here is carrying forward to allow us to pay for those staff to do those survey works. It's not about replacing, those 2 staff aren't going to be responsible for replacing the play parks, obviously. This is to inform which play parks get done and when. Okay,
Grant, Grant, I think you've probably got further questions, because I can see your hand is still up anyway. So apologies if anything that I asked Jackie wasn't a true reflection or the correct way that you wanted me to convey your questions.
You also asked about the status of the recruitment. Again, I'd need to go to the resource around that. I'm not involved in that recruitment directly. I do know that obviously that money is required to pay for the post going forward. So we'll have the money available next year and into the following year to pay for that. I just had clarification, it was 23 months that those posts.
Right, so it was 23 months, which is good, because that's clarity in that. What I would say is, when the paper was brought to the executive, I think that this is new, that's in this paper, but maybe I'm misrepresenting it, because for what financial year the funding was actually going to fall into. Because if you remember, there was 60 million that was announced by the Scottish Government that they were actually going to put into the 32 local authorities to basically for play parks, and then obviously there was the announcement of the first 100 physical, working days of Parliament, as every government does anyway, where they put their election, promises that they say this is what we're doing, of which that's when the first 5 million was obviously coming out, which obviously everybody's grateful for the money coming into the local authorities. Grant, have we answered what you wanted?
Yeah, no, really, I was looking to find out the duration of the contracts. I had concerns about the sheer ground that these officers would have to, cover. And I think the duration of the contract does flesh that out a little bit. It does answer my question to an extent regarding the work that has to be undertaken.
Right, okay, that's great. So you still have your hand up. All right, okay, legacy. Okay, thank you, Grant. Okay, that's perfect. Right, so Walter, you've got your hand up.
Yes, thanks, Chair. The first one's about play parks as well.
Okay, doke.
Do we have a programme for what's going to be completed over the next year? Do you have a rolling programme for that? Because we're kind of falling off a cliff at the moment, so I'm not kind of sure what's going to happen next month, or if I don't get re-elected, what I'm going to tell my people, So I'm looking for a rolling programme, and also in terms of your the surveys, what parks are going to be surveyed and which parks are not going to be surveyed. I'm assuming some of them are okay. I think it'd be useful for councillors to know what that information is. And I guess those two things are kind of connected. So I'd like to know where we are on that in terms of the programme, and if we could say something.
Okie dokie. I can answer the second one, which is that they are all 233 play parks are going to be assessed. As for the programme, like somebody else is going to have to answer that one, for the fact that as part of the papers, it says that the recruitment process, that's one of the things that when I spoke to Jackie about a minute ago, we don't know where we're at with that because the people haven't been taken on yet. So
I understand, Chair, but that's for the surveys. I want to know what the programme is going forward over the next year and a half, for example.
Right, so what the aims, objectives and project outputs are, so what the project plan is.
Yeah.
Right, okay, well, they will have done a project plan.
Fine, tell me. I'm just trying to get clarification on that.
No bother. Jackie, can you tell him about the project plan then?
I'd have to ask the department on that. So the projects that we've got in the approved capital programme just now obviously will be what's either been worked on or will be worked on. We don't have an approved capital programme yet for next year. So at the moment, until the council meeting in the 3rd of February, we'll not have an approved capital programme. But what I can do is ask the resource what their intentions are, perhaps through their revenue budgets, for example, or from continuation from this year. But I can check that out with their team.
Jackie, could I just ask a question on the back of that? See, because obviously it was announced it was going to be 60 million over like 5 years, and then obviously we've been given 5 million just now. Like, is there just in case I've missed it, like has there been discussions about the other 7 million that would come in? Basically, like, because obviously if it was going to be 60 million over 5 years and we've got a promise of 5 million over the 32 local authorities, just for obviously, like, the plan going forward, if we get anything when we'd get the other 7 million in this year?
We haven't been notified of our share of any further money yet.
Right, okay. And what normally happens?
It can happen at any particular time. You can get notification of funding throughout the year.
And so it's to be thick. Is it something that we need to request, or is it something that we are then given? How does it work for that? Because it's like funding out with kind of thing.
Again, for different pots of funding, it can be different things. The first 5 million was given on an allocation basis across 32 local authorities. So I would expect that any further funding might be on that basis. But again, it's absolutely at the will of the Scottish Government to make decisions on how pockets of money are allocated. I would expect it would be an allocation across 32 authorities when we get our next allocations. But the 5 million that we have had allocated is absolutely, my understanding is that is, we're going to use that to try and survey the play parks that are there. And then we could use that information when we get the rest of the funding in, or more funding in, to see which parks we can do.
Okie dokie. Walter, you've still got your hand up.
Yeah, it's about the...
A subscript, sorry.
Yeah, it's about the 7 Bridges film. I'm sorry, it's only 4, Eric, isn't it? Yeah, I'm just for clarity. Eric wanted 4 bridges. He got finance for 3 bridges. There's been an underspend on the 3 bridges. And we have to go back to a meeting to find out what's going to happen to that underspend. Is that it, Jackie?
The other key fact is, though, that one of the bridges is costing twice as much as was initially anticipated. So it's not just about the underspend, it's also about the overspend. And whether that underspend would be allocated towards the other bridge.
So do we know when we're going to put Eric out his misery?
I'm not on the executive committee, Councillor Brogan, so I'm not involved in that.
Oh, Eric, we're going to have to ask somebody else, I think.
Okie dokie, thanks, Chair. Walter. Is that you finished, Walter?
Yes, I'm finished.
Okie dokie. Eric, you've still got your hand up.
I'm not going to go on about bridges again, don't worry. I've got what I wanted on the bridges. Well, I haven't, but I've got as much as I can expect. No, about play parks. On the 3rd of April last year, our First Minister said that she was going to put up £60 million fund. We'll put in place a plan to renew every play park in Scotland so that all children have access to a place to play in their own community. Now, I did argue at the time that 60 million might renew the play parks in North and South Lanarkshire, so long as the rest of Scotland was okay to step out of the system. We've got the first allocation was 5 million. Of that, our allocation has been entirely spent on recruiting 2 people to do a survey. In other words, not a single lick of paint is going to come out of that money, let alone a new slide or a new swing or anything else. This is purely for a survey. I would like to know what proportion of all the 233 play parks in South Lanarkshire will be refurbished, and will that number be every play park in South Lanarkshire, if not necessarily Scotland, or what proportion of those we might think we might be able to do, considering the average cost of a play park renewal is around about the £100,000 mark, going by the ones that we've done through the wind farms. So what proportion are we likely to see done if we get the full allocation of money?
Okay, Jackie.
Eric, I can't tell you that because the surveys haven't been done for a start, and we don't know what allocation of money we're getting or when. So I can't answer any of your questions, I'm afraid.
So do we anticipate it's going to be anywhere near every play park?
I can't answer that. I'm sorry. I could take your question back to the department, but from a financial perspective, we've been given a share of £5 million and a decision's been taken on how that's spent. I think the surveys have to happen to inform anything further, and that will be dependent on the funding that's made available. So I think there's a few steps to happen here before any commitment can be made around what's going to be renewed.
Okay, and just one very final point. The 60 million is not being allocated in any shape or form. It was a political promise given in the run-up to last year's election. It's not a commitment. The only money that's been committed to this is the 5 million that has been agreed by the Scottish Government. I have no doubt the other 55 million will come. Unfortunately, I just think it's way short of the mark and it's never going to achieve what was set out by it. But there we are.
Thank you.
Nothing more to add, sorry.
Okie dokie. Does anybody else have anything they want to raise on that item? No. Okay, let's move on. So I propose that item. Can I have a seconder?
I'll second it.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to move on to item 3B. Wait till I get to my pages. So item 3B then this is your capital budget monitoring. So this is for your housing capital programme. So this is pages 29 to 34. And I'm going to hand you back over to Jackie.
Thank you, Chair. So same time period we're covering to the 31st of December, this time for housing capital. Section 4.1 of the report reminds us that the programme, the budget for housing capital is £79.6 million, and they are working to maximise spend this year and get that out the door. Period 10, which is up to the 31st of December, reports that we've spent £51.8 million of that programme, slightly behind where we expect to be at this point in the year. On Appendix A on page 31, we have the funding that makes up the budget, predominantly through borrowing and through the housing revenue account contribution towards capital. And on page 32, we have the profile of spend graph, which reports how we are performing against our expectations that were set at the start of the year. The physical progress starts on page 33, and Derek can take us through that.
Thank you. The executive summary then on page 33 shows that we have 6 projects that are reporting behind the programme. And over the page, on page 34, I'll just run down a wee list of them. So Bosfield Place, sheltered housing complex. We've had some delays experienced due to resourcing issues. That's within my team. Calderwood multi-storey blocks, that's delays we've experienced in the procurement route of that, because it's a fairly specialist heating system that we're looking to try and install there, so that there's been some delays in trying to find appropriate contractors to do that. The next one is 11 and 13 Sweet Hope Place in Bodwell. There's been some delays in my team again, experienced around resources for that. At St Joseph's Primary School site, the new build part of the housing development there, we've had some delays with the contractor experiencing some material and staffing supply issues. So that's all been kind of COVID related, as well as delivery delays. So they are working hard to try and recover that, and we are already taking delivery of some of the new houses there. So it's not going too badly. It's not been as badly affected as the care facility. The next one is the completion of our HEEPS, so Home Energy Efficiency Programme for Scotland. The Phase 7 project, which was actually a company that failed to deliver those projects. So this is the completion project of that. We've had some supply chain issues with materials on that. So that's powder materials as well as insulation. We've had some delays with that project. And the last one is Shawlands Crescent, Lark Hall and Springbank Park, both the travelling persons sites, the external wall insulation project. So we've had some delays with electrical contractor resourcing issues there, primarily around COVID. That's all, Chair.
That's great. Thank you very much, as always. So I'll just open up the floor for questions, and I can see Eric has his hand up. Okie doke, Eric.
Very briefly, are there any cost implications to these delays? I noticed around procurement, getting new contractors and so forth. Are they having any cost implications or merely time delays?
I can take that one, Chair, if that's okay. Yeah. If we've not already secured the contractor, then yes, we will have some cost. We will experience cost increases if we've not already secured the contractor. There's a number of these sites where we are getting some complaints, shall we say, from contractors who've maybe priced these jobs a couple of years ago, and we are trying to work that through with them to minimise the effect on our programme of those increases. So yes, we are having difficulties in that regard, yes.
Will we get any quantification of that at any point?
On a job-by-job basis, I could probably do a bit of that, but whether, I mean, we will try and cope with that within the overall programme of work so that it doesn't actually affect the overall spend.
Okay. No, that's fine. I just wonder if there was going to be significant numbers, when and if we would get information about it. You know, it's one of the things that bothers me slightly is sometimes it can be difficult to get information. Not difficult, but you have to know to look for it. Like the Bridge Maintenance Fund, I only found out about that because I happened to read a paragraph in an appendix on a committee that I don't actually sit on. And I saw one paragraph of it, despite the fact we've had that money since last summer. And it's the same here. Sometimes I think it would be quite nice to actually see some of this stuff rather than have to go and dig. I didn't know about the other two bridges, for example. I had to go and ask. And when I ask, I find out the information. But there we are. Sorry, it's just me being grumbly.
No, you're not being grumbly, it's fine. You're just raising points. I think probably what it is, Eric, is the officers have such a multitude of tasks to do, and they have so many projects they've got to work on, and they need to know their jobs inside out, which they do, obviously, like operationally. And of course, it's our job to, ask the questions, but it's like anything else, there's so many bits of paper that everybody needs to take into account. So I don't believe that anything is deliberately made difficult for us. I think it's just a simple case of maybe we think something should be easier, and that's when we get the opportunity to raise it, like what you've done, so that it means that, you can do, your job. I mean, I think one of the important things that Derek raised there, as it's just like he's got a really hard working department, you know, and they're obviously under the cosh, whether it's staff absences or whatever because of COVID, and it's actually nothing to do with contractors at some point, you know, and there's like this human element. And I think that, you know, we all need to take that into account, and we need to be there to manage expectations. And of course, we need to be on the scrutiny forum scrutinising, you know, because that's correct to ask the, you know, the questions. But, you know, we're not always going to get the answer we want. But it's not because it's not the right answer. It's just that that is what the answer is. Walter.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Thanks, Chair. Just to kind of lead on from Eric's comment there.
Okay.
It really would be nice if there was a database that we could just ask a question to and it would come up with some of the details. Okay.
Right, okay. Do you know what? I'm not going to say, like, no, but what I'm going to say is, like, you know, well, where are they going to get the money to come up with that database to ask those questions? I think it's a simple case of we've got the officers there, and it's just if there's a project that we want to know about, then I think that we can email them and we can ask them, you know, questions. And if we don't have the chance to do that, or it's something that comes up at this committee, we can just ask. We can ask. Eric, apologies for not letting you come back in.
Sorry, it's okay. I'm actually, I sort of agree with Walter, but I also agree with you. But all I'm thinking is that we're a financial scrutiny forum. So in some ways, whether things are getting built or not is not really our business. The question is the finance of them. That's the thing that matters to us. And all I'm really interested in there is to know whether we're simply delaying the paying of something, which actually, from a financial point of view, isn't necessarily a bad thing. But if that delay is going to cost us money, then really that's the information that we need to know, because we need to know if these delays are contributing to the finances of the council. So it just seems to me it's great knowing what these are and why they're late, and that's lovely to know. But in terms of the purpose of scrutinising the finances of this council, it's nice to know, is that going to cost us an extra few £1,000s? It's within the contingency. No, it doesn't, you know, it's not going to matter. Or are there millions of pounds of overruns here that are going to impact on our overall capital budget? That's all I'm really asking for. So I don't know if I need a database, much as I would like one, but it would just like to say no cost implication of circa would just be useful in terms of scrutinising these figures.
Officers, is there anything from what Eric said you think that there is something that I should be asking of you that I haven't, to be able to help with the scrutiny of the forum, in case I'm missing something?
Can I come in, Chair?
Yes, please.
Just in terms of the scrutiny role, what we do is we bring the executive committee papers here. So these papers that we're reporting are very much the executive committee papers, and that is what, as officers, we are reporting on the financial position for the council to the executive committee for their approval or noting, and we bring those here. Now, whilst this isn't a decision-making forum, what we are doing is allowing this forum to have the same information as the executive committee and allow this discussion. So if there is something that is noteworthy and we have to tell officers about, we would do that through the exceptions to the capital programme. So that list of adjustments, that's where we are seeing pressures that we have to report on, or movement in the programme because of perhaps delays or other reasons. We'd report that to the executive committee. And this forum's seeing that. So that's the way that we are trying to give members the information around the programme to allow the scrutiny. On the capital programme, revenue is slightly different. We provide different information for revenue.
No, that's great. Do you remember, for the people that was on finance yesterday, it was just, there was a finance paper and we had a discussion on it, and it was just, there could be like a better way that something was brought forward. If there is something that you think that should be done, then please say. One of the things that I will say on behalf of this committee, not just because I'm chair, I think the papers are very, very clear that we get. I think they've been phenomenal with the fact that the way that they have split up the finances, like, you know, with what our COVID spend is against our COVID spends. I think that everything has been very, very clear. But Jackie's not precious. So see if there's something you think that, could or should be done differently, please do say it. But the fact is, I do think this is a very well run committee. So I'm not doing down anything that anybody has said, and I fully respect all of your opinions as members, and I think this is a great committee, and I think that we are right to scrutinise, which is what we do. So I'll hand you back over, Eric, and you can tell me what you think.
Yeah, just actually yesterday's meeting did influence a lot of my thinking today, but no, all I was saying is, yes, we get the same information as the executive, but we're scrutinising the executive to see if the executive are doing the job right. Put very simply, oversimplistic, I suppose. But if the question that I'm raising here is, can you properly scrutinise these reports without the financial implications of them, then perhaps what I'm saying is maybe the executive should be looking for that information, and maybe the executive should be considering that information as much as we should be. So it's, I think, within the remit of this committee to say that we're not sure that the information being given to the executive is sufficient for them to have scrutinised it properly, criticising the executive as much as we are in any of the officers, I suppose. But I'm not trying to be overly critical. I don't think anybody's deliberately hiding these figures. I mean, I'm not having a go like that. I just think it would be useful to scrutinise them to know what their actual implication is in pounds, shillings and pence, or as rough as is possible to do. That's all.
I think they're all fair comments, Eric. I honestly do. Now, Walter wants in, but Jackie, were you going to say something first? Do you want to come in after Walter?
Just to respond to Councillor Holford's point there, absolutely. The information that we provide in those exceptions is officers advising members of the areas where there are differences in costs or where there's movement in spend. If there was something else that we have to report on, it would be part of those exception reports. So there isn't like a hidden list of here's all the problems that we're not telling members about. And that's the job of officers, is to manage these programmes and report where there are issues. And absolutely, if there's a particular project that you don't see as reporting a problem on, but you have reason to believe that there is a problem, we're here to be accountable for that. But we're not keeping a separate list that's not for reporting. There are projects and programmes of work where we will manage the position, and by manage I mean I probably go back to the schools programme where there was an allocation of funding across a programme of works, and on occasions maybe some projects would slightly overspend or slightly underspend, but on the whole that programme was reported and managed. So if I can give any comfort, that the papers include the areas of exception, and that's where we have to get approval for that. It's not just us telling you, for information's sake. It is about approval to change a capital programme because of whatever reason, be it overspends, be it timing differences. That's what that paper's doing. So that is the list of areas where we have to tell members about. That's our means to do that.
Obviously, we're not approving it, but we're just scrutinising whether it was approved correctly or whether we have criticism of it. But without the numbers, what are we approving? Late yesterday, we had a case of here's the number, but no information about why we were writing off 2.75 million. Turns out it's perfectly reasonable. There wasn't a problem, but there wasn't any information. So we spent half an hour, and I appreciate I'm wasting time in just the same way today, but we spent half an hour of 30 people's time, 15 man hours of time, nearly 2 working days of time, where a couple of lines of explanation on the report would have made it clear why we were writing off 2.7 million, and we wouldn't have worried about it. And here we're discussing these items, and it could be that there's no overspend, or the overspend with them is within 3% or whatever that's within the allowable contingencies. 10%. And it's just whatever the figure is, it doesn't really matter. But if we had that, then I wouldn't be asking these questions, and maybe that would be better. Sorry, I'm going on too long on this. Sorry.
You're not going on. It's a forum for us to have these conversations. I think it's fine. I do think your point has been made. I think Jackie will definitely take on board. Walter, and I'll take you, and then I'm going to have a break.
I think, listen, we're a very open and transparent forum, right? And,
we are.
and that's what it's meant to be. We're also meant to be a random bunch of councillors that are representative of the councillors who are not in the executive committee, as far as I'm concerned. Whether that's true or not is another issue. But and yeah, there are items put before us that we can discuss and ask questions on. But I think Jackie alluded to this as well. There are items there that just because of our expertise or where we happen to be yesterday or whatever, that we think has an impact. So, and we're quite entitled to ask questions about it. I don't think that's an issue, and I don't think anybody's saying it's an issue. So I wouldn't beat yourself up, but it's not all about money, but it is all about money. But that money affects your residents and my residents and everybody else's. And if we think there's a point to be made or something that the executive committee can learn from, then we're duty bound to ask those questions. So I think we're very open, we're very transparent, and I think it's working well in every instance.
Thank you. I'm on the executive, but I'm allowed just before MD basically puts me in the bad girl step on the stairs. Anyway, what I'm going to do is let's have a 5-minute break. I'm sitting at 3:04. Let's be wild and go for 10 past. So, Carol, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, sorry, Chair. Can we just approve that item before we go to the adjournment?
Apologies. Okay, so I'm looking for a seconder.
I'll second it for you.
Thank you very much. You get in there just ahead of Eric. Right, okay, so would it be okay then, Carol, if we then stop and we have a break then, and I'll see you all in 5 minutes?
Yep, that's lovely, Chair.
just before, obviously, the recording stopped, for us starting back, we were covering off item 3B, so we've put that one to the side. Oh gosh, now we never actually said thank you to Derek. Is he gone?
Yeah, he is.
Right, okay, Derek, for the purpose.
Chair, Carol's got her hand up.
Yeah, apologies. Just before we move on, I need to run through a quick scenario because we've had the adjournment.
Excellent, sorry, apologies, Carol, hand over to you.
No problem at all. Okay, so if we can just quickly confirm, we still have Councillor Brogan. Yeah, I can see you there.
Yes,
we have apologies from Councillor Buchanan, Councillor Kalikis, Councillor Donnelly. We still have Councillor Ferguson.
Yep, present.
Thank you. Councillor Holford.
Yep.
Apologies from Councillor Lennon. We still have Councillor McAdams and Councillor Cowie.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, that's excellent. Thanks very much. Well, welcome back, everybody, then. So, apologies, I should have thanked Derek before we stopped for a break for his comprehensive report and for the fact he's always there answering all our questions. So, Derek, if you're listening, thanks very much. Okay, we'll move on then to item number 4 then. So this is your revenue budget monitoring. So this is on your papers, colleagues. It's pages 35 to 54. And I'm going to hand it over to Jackie.
Thank you, Chair. So again, covering the same period as we've been talking about in the earlier papers, this is our position to the 31st of December and also the projection for the year to the 31st of March. So at section 3 of the report, we detail what this report will cover. And as always, we've tried to break it down into component parts to help split out the impact of the pandemic from our normal activity. So we'll talk about the position for the general fund, including department spend, and then we'll move on to talk about what the projected outturn is for the COVID spend this year. If I take us on to section 4 of the report, this is our general services probable outturn. This is our projection for the year, and this doesn't include the impact of COVID. What you can see there at table 1 is a summary of what we're reporting for the year, and that's a underspend of £4.794 million. And members will remember from previous years, what we also do at this point in the year is ask for approval for any transfers to reserves to take place. So that position that we're reporting there of £4.7 million is after transfers to reserves have taken place. And we'll cover in an appendix what those transfers to reserves actually were. So a little summary at 4.3 about each of the, from 4.3 about each of the particular elements that make up that underspend. So firstly is the resources position. So this is our department spend, and that's reporting an overspend of £585,000. And that's predominantly due to children and family services within social work. And again, members will remember we've been reporting all year about the costs involved, particularly around external placements of children and the numbers of placements that we've made, and that is causing an overspend position. What's also included within that overspend overall for resources is the fact that our social work spend that relates to the adults and older service, which is part of the delegated powers of the IJB. So we have an element of our service that the IJB has responsibility for. That particular service is underspending, but that's predominantly due to monies that we received late in the year from the Scottish Government that won't spend this year, but will carry it forward to spend on social care next year. So as part of this paper, we were asking for approval that that money is kept ring-fenced for adults and older people. It's actually held in the IJB budget. So that's kind of sitting to the side, and that doesn't impact on our bottom line position. There's also a paragraph there in relation to loan charges. We are seeing a further underspend in loan charges of £1.3 million. This is at section 4.4, apologies. An underspend of £1.4 million. And we are proposing that that's set aside and used for future budget strategies. So again, we'll put a ring fence around that. So once that money's in the reserve, set aside for future years, we're reporting a break-even position this year. At section 4.5, we've got something that we're heading up, corporate items. What that really means is any allocations of funding that hasn't been distributed or shared with departments. And we're showing an underspend in that line of £2.471 million. That's predominantly because within our budget this year, we have an amount of money in relation to pay award, and that will help pay for future years' pay award. So that underspend that we have there of 2.471 million actually reflects the fact that some of the budget this year is really going to help with next year's pay award. So that's an underspend. At section 4.6, there's a reference there to strategy investments. Now, this relates to the £10 million that was agreed as part of this year's budget for investments. And as we've known, that won't all spend this year. It's profiled to spend over a couple of years. So £5.4 million of that allocation will be available next year to continue the spend in those areas. And then at the bottom of page 36, we've got council tax. This is the other main area that's contributing to the overall underspend. And that reflects a relatively small underspend in council tax reduction scheme, an over-recovery in council tax due to in-year collection of properties. So our property numbers have been higher than we had anticipated, and our arrears collection is also higher than we anticipated. The other area that feeds into that is empty property charges. So we make a charge now for an empty property, and again, that's coming in higher than we budgeted. So altogether, we're getting £2.9 million of a over-recovery of council tax. If you look back again at table 1 on page 36, you'll see those areas highlighted, and they make up the £4.794 million underspend that the council is reporting. Now, I mentioned transfers to reserves. On the top of page 37, we go into a little bit more detail there. So that underspend position is after we have moved pockets of money into the reserves and are ring fenced for future years. And the total of those transfers to reserves is £17.4 million. And when we get to the appendix, you'll see the details of those. So that's all the non-COVID world. Moving into section 5, we then move to COVID. And what we're showing here is that we do expect to spend £16.7 million in relation to COVID. We had funding of £32 million for COVID, so that leaves an underspend of 15.6. Now, just to explain that underspend, it's not that we haven't spent as much as we anticipated. It simply reflects the fact that we were given money this year in relation to COVID that we will plan to spend next year. So that underspend is really to be set aside and allow us to meet COVID costs into next year. Now, that was all non-specific COVID funding. You will remember that we also had funding for specific things, particularly education around COVID. And there's a small amount, just over £3 million, that will be carried into next year to help pay for those costs. That predominantly reflects the fact that we've got funding for things like teachers that will spend in the last term of the year, and that will fall into the new financial year. A little summary at section 6 of all of those transfers to reserves that I've just mentioned, the COVID reserves and also the general transfers that I mentioned at section 4.8. Section 7 just summarises all of that together and puts again another little table there that shows after transfers to reserves, we have an underspend of £4.794 million. And what Executive Committee were asked to approve was that £4.794 million would be set aside, carried forward in reserves to help meet COVID costs. Because whilst we do know that we will have spend in relation to COVID going forward, we don't have any indication that we will receive extra money for that. If I move over to page 38, that simply reflects the actual spend position to the 31st of December. And that's all in line with our expected projection for the year. Probably of interest to you will be the appendices. Now, Appendix 1 on page 40 just gives a little bit more information around the underspend positions that we reported. So it goes into a wee bit more information on the resource spend, around loans fund and around the corporate items that I mentioned. Appendix 2 on page 43 gives you the usual detailed information around budgets and spend across services. And then again, as you're used to seeing on page 44, that again is the expenditure that we'll make across types of spend, for example, employee costs, property costs and the like. Probably one of the more interesting appendices is on page 45. This is Appendix 3, and this shows you all of the transfers to reserves that were approved as part of the Executive Committee last week. And you can see the large areas that we would expect again this year, particularly around education. Pupil Equity Fund, we know that we receive money in that relates to the school year, and as part of that school year falls into the next financial year, we have to carry that money forward. And we've also got money in relation to the expansion of early years. And again, we set that aside and put a ring fence around that, and that will be spent for that expansion programme. Other areas to note probably include at the bottom of that page, utilities. We reported to the Executive Committee earlier in the year that we would look to manage some of the increase in utilities costs through ring fencing our underspend this year and having that available for next year. Probably over on page 46, areas to note include the COVID section there. You can see the 15.6 million COVID funding that again we'll put a ring fence around and keep that for next year. And a little summary at the bottom there that adds up, tots up all of the contributions that we're making to reserves that we've covered in the report. The non-COVID transfers, the COVID transfers, and the specific funding in relation to COVID. Appendix 4 on page 47 again gives you information around spend, but that is after transfers to reserves. So similar information, but after transfers to reserves. And then on Appendix 5, apologies, I don't have a page number, on page 49, on Appendix 5, you've got information in relation to COVID. So again, I usually say this is quite an interesting piece of information around how much we're expecting to spend in relation to COVID for the year, with details on the next page from page 50 on the actual items of spend that we're making in relation to COVID. Final appendix is on page 53, and that's around the housing revenue account, and that simply reports that our housing revenue account is breaking even for the year. So a fair bit in that, Chair, but hopefully through the work that we've done through the year in terms of explaining to the forum how we're reporting this, hopefully that's enough to help the forum understand the position. But happy to take any questions, thanks.
That's great, Jackie, thanks very much. Eric?
Just a couple of questions, because you're quite right. A lot of this has been carried throughout the year, and I kind of followed it through. But two questions. One is fairly straightforward, I think. Section 4.3 on page 36. There was a question raised at the executive by Councillor Convery and by Councillor Harrow. It does say in line 2 that was an overspend of 0.58 million, and then it says the resource underspend of 0.58 million. A little bit like a womble. It's overground, underground. Which is it, an overspend or an underspend?
Apologies, Councillor Holford, I should have mentioned that at the time. It is an overspend position, and that reference on line 6, I think it is a typographical error, of which I apologise for. So it is an overspend of £585,000, and that reflects what's in table 1 as well. So resources position is a 585 overspend.
Fine, that was simple enough. The other question I had was, we're putting away that 4.794 million towards COVID costs. Now that figure is determined by what we've got to put aside rather than an estimate of what we might need. You presumably have some idea, if we don't get any further funding from the Scottish Government, what sort of position are we likely to find us as? How long is that likely to last? What's your thinking around that?
So in relation to next year, you're right, we've got that £4.7 million, which absolutely is a result of what we've got left and we can put to reserves. We also have the £15.6 million that's referred to in section, if I quickly find it, in section 5 that we've set aside. So that takes us to a position of, if I can do my sums really quickly, £20 million. We also report in that paragraph that this year we're expecting to spend around £16.7 million. So if everything that was spent this year had to be spent next year, that feels okay. But we absolutely appreciate that things change. Some of the areas of spend that we have included for this year might not replicate next year, and there might be other areas where we see a bigger impact. So I'm confident enough that a £20 million pot of money is sufficient to see us through 2022-23, but hopefully with no further restrictions put in place or anything else that would cause our spend to exceed that, if that gives any comfort.
Thank you, that gives me comfort. Ceteris paribus, we're okay. Thank you very much.
Okie dokie. Thanks, Eric. Walter?
Thanks, Chair. It's page 36, 4.7, council tax.
Yes.
The over recovery. I'm sure I've asked this years ago, but I forgot the answer to it, Jackie, so forgive me. That's going into recovery. Does that go back into the community, or how do we deal with that money going forward?
In terms of the over recovery, that is contributing towards that £4.7 million of a council underspend. So the fact that we've recovered more council tax means that our overall council position is a £4.7 million to the good. So what's been agreed by the Executive Committee is that £4.7 million will sit in a reserve to help pay for COVID costs. So that's what that money will be used for.
Yeah, for COVID.
For COVID. Yeah.
Jackie, can I ask a question, please? See the COVID money that we get in, right? So we know that for next year, there's like 20 million ring fenced for COVID. How much did we spend this year on COVID?
We are estimating at section 5, we're saying 16.7 is what our estimate is for COVID.
Right, okay. And obviously there's no, tell me if I'm wrong here, so the money that we get in for winter payments and stuff like that we had to be funneled through our accounts, that isn't money that we're getting in again, isn't it not? So would that mean it would be like, or was that out of a different budget?
In terms of specific grant funding, so maybe for businesses or for specific payments?
I was just thinking about
that's got its own funding. So that was specific COVID funding that we had, and that's paying for those specific COVID costs. So I would expect if we had to replicate, grant payments to organisations or, financial support that we were given specific money for, that we would continue to get more money if we were asked to pay that out again.
But worst case scenario, next year isn't going to be the year that everything hits, because there is COVID money effectively for another year that would mirror the year after that would hit. Right, okay, that's fine. I just hadn't thought of that with regards to the money that we had for ring fencing for going forward. Does anybody else have any other questions about that paper? I mean, it is a deep dive, that paper, which you do an amazing job of actually going through it and making it sound easy, which it's not. Does anybody have any questions? No? Right, okay, excellent. You're totally getting off that one lightly, by the way, because there's so much in that paper. Right, okay, so thanks very much for that.
I'll be back in 6 months' time with some questions.
You hope. Right, okay, thank you. Jackie, that was great. So I'll look for somebody then that will second that paper for me.
I'll second it.
Thank you, Eric. That's much appreciated. Okay, so the next one we're moving on to then is item number 5. So this is the detailed resource analysis, and this is the one that Lorraine always takes us through. So it's pages 55 to 130, and Lorraine, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Forum. The paper starts on page 55, as Chair explained, but the actual detail of the resources doesn't start to page 57. So the first resource we have, as normal, is community and enterprise resources, and the bottom line position that you can see down there on the far right-hand side is 3.9 million of an overspend there. And the forecast position, which is in the greyed out box, is the first time we've reported a probable outturn, and it ties back to the probable outturn explanations that Jackie gave you in that earlier report. So if I can take you on to the variance explanations, and again, in the usual way, I'll pick up any new ones that have come in. For community and enterprise resources, there's quite a number. So, Chair, if you'll indulge me, I'll just focus on the bigger ones. I'm just very conscious of time this afternoon. So, starting on page 59, we have additional spend and overspend there in repairs and maintenance for external contractors. 69,000 sitting within the COVID spend area, and that's relating to the Carluke Civic Community site, where we've had expenditure in relation to compactor installation, and that's really reflecting the additional volume of waste collected due to COVID. The roads line just below that, in terms of electrical spend, the overspend there reflecting higher than anticipated electricity costs for electric vehicle charging, and again that's reflecting increased demand. If I can take you down to page 61, another sizable new variance that's come in there within transport and plant is 93,000 of an overspend in roads, and that's mainly due to higher than anticipated costs for ad hoc repairs to vehicles. And at the bottom of that page, page 61 again, within facilities, streets, waste and grounds, we have an underspend of 95,000, and that's mainly within the street service and is due to the reduction in the number of vehicles in operation. Over the page, on page 62, we have fleet, environmental and projects showing an underspend there, still within transport and plant, and that's reflecting the reduction in fuel usage in pool cars within the fleet service. Over the page then to page 63, a new variance there within facilities, streets, waste and grounds, and that's in payments to contractors, and that's reflecting additional works being carried out at Lammermoor allotments. And on the income side, which I think is the last couple of variances there, so the first one's at the top of page 64, fleet, environmental and projects, we've got an over-recovery there, and that relates to additional income we received from Transport Scotland in relation to passenger services. And the last one is on page 66, again within facilities, streets and grounds, and that's an under-recovery there in terms of recharges to other departments of the council, and that's mainly the net effect of reduced income from ground services, partly offset by an over-recovery of income for the provision of additional services within the facilities service. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, that's great, comprehensive as always. Does anybody have any questions about any of the items on that resource? Okay, we're all good, Lorraine. Would you just move on to the next resource? Thank you.
Good. So education then starts on page, sorry, as I whiz through the trends, page 73. And again, what you can see in the greyed out box is the probable outturn position for the resource. And in the bottom right hand corner, we can see the position as at the end of December, and that's showing 1.151 million overspend there, chunky amount of it within the COVID line, and you can also see the transfers to reserves there within education too. Over the page, on page 73, we have got not a lot of significant variances, or not a lot of variances rather, but the significant ones I'll pick up on. Teachers, basic, SUP and national insurance. Schools, we have an underspend there, and that's reflecting the current year learning recovery funding allocation for additional teachers, which will be carried forward to meet the costs up to the end of the school term. So we've got funding that lasts for the full academic year. We need to take the little bit that relates to April to June into the new financial year. So it's showing as an underspend at the current point in time. Over the page, pupil equity fund, so that's on page 75. Same situation, we get the money from the government for the full academic year, but we only need the 9 months in the current year. So the balance sits as an underspend and will be transferred to reserves to use for the April to June. And that's quite a chunky amount, but it's on a par with previous years. Next page, page 76, we've got a catering underspend there. That's reflecting the expenditure on the provision of lunches and early years establishments, and it's lower than we had anticipated. And again, we'll be looking to carry that money forward to meet the ongoing costs of the early years expansion programme. And also within that underspend, there's a bit of an underspend in relation to Breakfast Club programme particularly. If I can take you over to page 78, we've got two income variances to highlight. Contributions from other local authorities, we've got an over-recovery there, and that reflects payments from other local authorities for placements within our own council establishments, and that offsets the costs of our own placements within other local authorities, so a bit of a reciprocal arrangement there. And in terms of the early years fees, we have an over-recovery there relating to an increased uptake of available nursery places beyond the 1140 hours available. And that's all for education, Chair.
Okay, that's fine. I'll just ask for any questions. Okay, I just want to point out, see for the Pupil Equity Fund on page 75, I know what you're saying, that, you know, it's not a surprising amount because it's the same amount effectively every year when it gets rolled over. I mean, when is somebody going to flag up that having this amount of money ring-fenced and it's sitting and it always getting rolled over, when we've got schools that basically, like, they don't have jotters, they don't have pencils, and there's other things that the money can't be spent on because it's ring-fenced for this PEF money? When does it actually get flagged up for this money sitting here that always then just sits and it always just rolls over? I mean, does that not in itself flag up that there's a problem, or is it just the wrong way that I'm looking at things? Jackie, you've got your mic on, Jackie.
Sorry, I've got my mic on. Sorry, Chair. I was going to say I can answer that perhaps.
Okay.
Some of these costs, obviously PEF is ring-fenced, that is given to the council for that particular purpose. We can't use that for non-PEF purposes. The reason that this gets carried forward every year is because it relates to spend between April and June, and some of that will be teaching staff as well. So if a member of staff is getting paid from PEF and they're in for the year, that, I'm going to say quarter of the year, it's not exactly a quarter, those costs will fall from this money, and that's why we carry that forward as well.
Can I ask a question then? Because it was something that happened the other day, and I mean, I don't think MD isn't all for participatory budgeting, because it's a good way for, like, you know, moving forward and making sure that there's proper community participation and deciding what's happening. But one of the things I didn't understand was when it came to the participatory budgeting with regards to the PEF money, that when some schools had basically, like, put out, and quite rightly, you know, to involving the children, involving the parents, to decide, you know, basically what their, you know, 5% was going to get spent on. That some people it wasn't 5%. It was just like one of the schools I know, it was like, say, 5,000, but then it meant they were actually going to be spending 14,000 rather than the 5,000. But it was because there was more money that you could use that was PEF money, but for to do with the participatory budgeting, which they were deciding on, was on 5,000, but they were then using 14,000. And it's just like, I think that's the bit that I'm just not understanding when it comes to PEF, to be honest with you, because I'm all for, like, whatever makes a difference, whatever's going to help our communities. Of course, all we want to do is the right thing by them, but it's just like, I don't know, I feel as if the goalposts kind of are getting moved, you know. So it's just like, if it's decided for participatory budgeting and it's the PEF money that's getting used, and it's the 5% of that PEF money that's getting used, and they're going to do a trim trail, but then they find out the trim trail's not £5,000, it's £14,000, but they're still going to do the participatory budgeting that they use that for, but they're actually going to take 14,000 rather than the 5,000. I need somebody to understand why that's allowed to actually happen within PEF.
Councillors need to take that back to education and ask them to explain the process that they've decided, they've chosen to use the money for that particular purpose. I don't know about that particular project myself, I'm afraid.
Yeah, it's just because it was talked about, you know, the other day, and it was very much like, oh, this is great that we're getting to do this. And it's like, you know, I am totally all for participatory budgeting, you know, but I just kind of like, that was the bit that I just wasn't getting, that bit at all, how that could actually happen within it. But nobody else, by the way, it was like literally nobody flinched. So I just thought, it's me. I thought this is a scrutiny forum, so I'll ask the question. But I don't know. I
can take that back to the resource.
Yeah, I would appreciate it, because do you know what? I'm all for every day's a school day and I'm happy to learn. But that was one that I wasn't actually understanding within the confines of what PEF was. Anyway,
which school it was, Monique, and I'll take that.
Yeah, it was that school, which is a brilliant school, might I add, St Kenneth's.
Okay.
Anyway, Lorraine, nobody else has any questions apart from me, so I'll hand it back to you. And so that was obviously education. No, it wasn't education we were on. Yes, it was education we were on.
Okay, so the next resource then, Chair, is finance and corporate.
So
that starts on page 85.
Perfect.
So again, you can see the sizable forecast for a probable outturn, the vast majority of which is in relation to COVID, and that's in the greyed out box. And then on the right hand side, you can see pretty much the proportionate element of that to the end of December, again reflecting the overspend and again primarily relating to COVID. The variance explanations start on page 86, and oh, hang on, made it too small. And the first one is in basic salary, so an underspend in personnel services, reflecting the budget available for modern apprentices and the people in post at the moment in terms of that programme. Over the page, over a couple of pages, page 88, we've got an underspend there in supplies for clients, communications and strategy, and that's just reflecting the level of spend that the service are incurring in relation to the level of demand for their products. Over the page, on page 89, we have an under recovery in terms of mobile phones, and that's reflecting the demand for handsets across all resources and is offset by an additional income line in the recharges side. Payments to other bodies, private individuals general, we've got 100,000 overspend there relating to spend on COVID, and it reflects the financial assistance being provided to tenants and is offset again by funding. And then if I can take you down to income, which starts on page 91, we have under recovery in relation to statutory additions in relation to cost of collection, and that's due to a reduction in the number of cases going to the reminder stage and subsequently progressing to summary warrant, and that means that there's a reduction in the income that we get from penalty charges. Over the page, there's a line DHP, 1.038 of an over recovery there, again within financial transactions, and that's in relation to the discretionary housing payments and reflects the additional expenditure line within transfer payments. So this is us really tidying up how things are looking as we've gone through the probable outturn exercise for the resource. Over the page, on page 93, we have an ESF over recovery line there in relation to audit services, and that reflects a recharge for the management costs. It's a fee income line basically that we can recharge to that programme for the work that we've done. And the final line there for finance and corporate is other income at the top of page 94. That's again within personnel services, and 162,000 of an under recovery there, and that relates to a reduced requirement from reserves to fund modern apprentices and is offset by the reduction I mentioned earlier in terms of the spend side. And that's all for finance and corporate, Chair.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Okay, there's no questions, Lorraine, if you would just like to move on to the next resource.
Housing and technical then starts on page 99. Again, the greyed out box shows you the forecast variance after transfers to reserves, pretty much all lying within the COVID line. And again, the bottom right hand corner shows the 644,000 over as at the end of period 10. Variance explanations start on page 100. In terms of the sizable ones, we've got on page 101, rent written off for bad periods, so an overspend there, 153,000, most of it lying within the COVID cost centre, and that's relating to the additional costs for temporary accommodation to meet the increased demand as a direct result of COVID-19. Fixtures and fittings, the line below within housing services, is showing an overspend of 214, and that reflects the current demand for the various elements of furnishing assistance for temporary accommodation. And I think that's all for housing and tech. Yep, there's nothing else that's new. Thanks, Chair.
Okie doke. Thanks very much. Lorraine, does anybody get any questions on that resource? No, I'm not seeing any questions. We'll be able to move on then, Lorraine.
Okay, thank you. The HRA statement then in terms of variance explanations, which is directly linked to the report that Jackie talked you through earlier, starts on page 109, sits on page 109, it's only one page. There are only 3 variances noted, and one of those is new, and that's in relation to grounds maintenance. We have an overspend there within the property cost line, and that reflects increased demand for special uplifts and special requests this year, with a balance across a number of other areas, giving you the overall variance in that line for property costs of 430,000. And that's all to highlight for HRA.
Okay, I think that's an interesting one, to be honest with you. Does anybody get any questions to do with that resource? Lorraine, what was the feedback from the officers with regards to the grounds maintenance being 252,000 over? because it is an overspend, but it's an interesting one because of, effectively, it's because of COVID. Well, I think a lot of it's to do with COVID, but I think also environmentally, we're pushing, we're educating, and we're trying to focus on alleviating the dumping, of the crime element of the dumping as well that we're pushing. Is anybody giving you any feedback on that one?
I don't have anything in particular, Chair. I don't know if Jackie does in terms of any conversation she's had with the service, but in terms of the management of the overall spend, I suppose all I would say is it's within the confines of the HRA, and we will just manage that in year with any balance to or from reserves at the end of the year. But I don't have anything specific on that line. Sorry. No, it's okay. I just think it's an interesting one. Anyway, thank you, Walter. I think you had your hands up first.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's just to kind of add to that, the amount of complaints I'm getting about rubbish lying about the streets and in the backyards of not just council house areas or amenity houses is just absolutely terrible. So I just think we'll probably have to do some extra special work to do a deep clean of all our areas over time. So I think we're going to be hit with some requests, and obviously that will have a financial impact going forward.
Okay, thank you, Eric.
Yeah, just about that. I think the real sort of background to that is the fact that we're not doing garden waste uplifts, so there's an awful lot more special uplifts been going on, and I'm just wondering whether the fact that the reason we're not doing garden waste uplifts is because we don't have enough drivers because of COVID and self-isolation, and certainly that's the answer I'm getting. So that would suggest that money is actually being spent because of COVID and should perhaps go under a COVID line rather than being picked up generally, though I suspect there's also a corresponding underspend somewhere in waste management services for not having to do all the picking up people's grass from them.
Do you know something, Jackie? I think that is actually an interesting one because it does flag. Lorraine's brilliant because every time we have a committee, she goes through and she gives us the unders and the overs, and it's so it's like she's flagging up for it. She's helping us out because instead of us having to look, she's pointing out the things for us to actually look at. And again, this is one that's pointed out. But I do agree with Eric. I mean, we do know as councillors, and we know from speaking to different resources that and there is only so many people that are trained to drive. There's only so many people that are trained to do specific jobs. It's just the council's done amazing when they've been working different people from different departments to cover different aspects and whatever else. But I really do think for that one, that one is something that should actually go under COVID for the very reasons that Eric said. I see you get a hand up, Jackie. I'll let you answer.
Yeah, just a reminder that this is the Housing Revenue account. So its very nature, it's ring fenced and it's funded from council tenants' rent. So the money that we've been given for COVID doesn't cover HRA, I'm afraid. So right, if that helps understand it. Also, 100%. Again, this is Housing Revenue account. So I believe this is about uplifts in housing estates, the parts that fall, within the HRA. So if there's dumping of stuff, for example, that's what's causing this increase in cost. There will be a pandemic influence here. We know that the dumping of anything has increased since the start of the pandemic. I also think this was an area that was problematic before the pandemic around things being dumped outside houses or in closes or whatever. I think it's one of those areas of social behaviour that we do just have to keep chipping away at and make every effort to try and improve or help people in as many ways as we possibly can to avoid these extra costs.
That's fine. I totally take that on board, Jackie, and thank you very much for pointing that out. Walter, did you want to come in?
Yeah, just to come back on that, totally agree with you, Jackie. It's a behavioural issue that's been exacerbated out of all proportion because of COVID, and the norm is now dump it and let somebody else worry about it. mean, so we're getting main roads blocked by rubble and all sorts of stuff. But but my reference was specifically at the council estate areas where it seems to be even worse than those, and that's areas I thought we would have at least been able to keep cleaner because we had some control over it. But anyway, it's really not a point for this meeting, but I think everybody's sharing the pain.
Okay, thanks very much, Walter. Lorraine, I'll let you move on then to the last resource.
Okay, social work resources then. Start on page 115, and again shows you the probable outcome in the greyed out box and the position at period 10 in the bottom right hand corner. In terms of variances, again, there are quite a few. I'll concentrate on the biggest ones, and they start on page 116. So within performance and support, halfway down the page, we have an underspend there in terms of a particular area of staffing, and that's the result of vacancies which the resource are actively recruiting for. Over the page, we have children and families, 75,000 of an underspend there at the top of page 117, sorry. And also adults and older, justice services, an underspend there. These are two new variances this period, and they are a result of vacancies which the resource are actively recruiting for. If I can take you over to page 118, within supplies and services, computer equipment purchase, within performance and support and adults and older people, we have overspends that have come in this period. In terms of the first one, for performance and support, it reflects the share of the costs for the council's computerised EDRMS filing system. And within adults and older people, an overspend there relating to the costs associated with the implementation of the new home care scheduling system. The next variance is on page 119. That's within food purchases. Adults and older people showing an underspend there, and that's a consequence of building-based day services currently not being fully operational during the pandemic. And if I can take you down to page 121, within payments to contractors and adults and older people specifically, we have an overspend there for the first time this period, and that's showing, due to a delay in the implementation of the 21-22 savings due to COVID-19, and has been managed within the overall budget. On the next page, 122, a home support overspend there relating to COVID, and that's additional demand as services are remobilised. And I think that's all for the resource. Yes, that's all the new variances. Thanks, Chair.
Okie doke. Have we got any questions for this last resource? Lorraine, you should be jumping for joy now. Okay, if there's no questions, then I'll just look for somebody to second this report then. Grant. Yay!
Yes,
right, okay.
I'll do it.
Thank you very much. Okay, so there's no other items of urgent business. Before I close down the meeting, I know you were panicking, Lorraine, that we were not going to finish on time. I could see it in your face. It's just to say a special thanks to the Cash General, which I'm assuming is Nicola. I might be wrong. To Carol for always keeping me right, and whenever I'm going to do something wrong, she secretly IMs me, so I've let the cat out of the bag to get me back on track. So thank you very much for helping me out. For Gillian, who always make sure that I actually know when the meetings are, and she's the force in the background making us all run properly. Jackie, for always being so comprehensive with all of your reports and always being super helpful. It's been an absolute pleasure basically working alongside you and Lorraine. Lorraine, you're always so great at pointing everything out, and I also really appreciate all your help at the pre-meetings for helping me understand the bits that I don't actually understand, and you're always very kind and nice the way that you explain things. Poor Derek, he's left, but we really appreciate him as well. I don't want to miss out the interpreters, who basically, all of the elected members, greatly appreciate your time to help the meetings run smoothly and to support our fellow fantastic councillor, Grant. And I just want to say to all my fellow councillors, this is our last meeting. And I hope to see you all, no matter what colour of rosette that you wear, in the next term. It's been a pleasure serving with you all. Everybody that's here today, are hard-working, dedicated councillors that care deeply about their community and work really, really hard. And it's a real pleasure being on this committee with you. And I like the fact that we get to have a laugh, but we do scrutinise, and it's all done civilly, which I think is really, really important. And so I just really appreciate the comradeship from all of you. So it's just to say thank you very much to everybody, because you've all been lovely the entire time.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Grant.
Yeah, we have to thank the Chair as well. Let's not forget. We all have a role, we all have a job to do, but I want to say a special thanks to the Chair for facilitating this meeting so well, these meetings so well. And again, thanks to everyone as well on the call. I really appreciate our working relationship, and I hope to see you all soon.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Grant. It means a lot for everything that you've said, and I really appreciate you, so thank you. And thank you very much, everybody. And Lorraine, we're still with 3 minutes to go. We're in time.